The chair scraped once, sharply, against the marble floor, and the entire hall fell silent. Doris sat frozen in the drafty back corner, where she had been placed hours earlier, the cold air from the side door still pressing against her shoulders, watching as Yoon So-jun, the guest of honor, bypassed the head table entirely and walked the full length of the grand exhibition hall in front of every investor, collector and committee member present. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. He didn't stop at the podium, where the MC stood waiting with prepared remarks. He didn't greet the organizers hovering eagerly near the entrance, clearly expecting him to take his reserved seat of honor at the front. He walked straight to her, lifted her chair with both hands, careful and unhurried, as though the eyes of an entire room watching him weren't worth a second thought, and carried it back across the room himself. Every eye in the hall followed him. He set the chair down directly beside his own at the main table, the legs settling with a soft, deliberate thud against the floor, and looked at her with an expression that made her pulse quicken in a way she couldn't fully explain, something steady and certain in his gaze that felt entirely unlike the polite, empty courtesies she had grown used to from powerful men in rooms like this one. "You belong here," he said simply. "Please, sit." Doris rose slowly, aware of hundreds of eyes tracking her movement across the hall, her heart hammering as she crossed the space that, moments earlier, she had assumed she would spend the entire evening watching from a distance. To understand why one of Korea's most powerful men would cross an entire room to carry a chair himself, we have to go back to earlier that same evening, to the moment Doris arrived and found her name missing from the seat she had been promised. She had walked into the exhibition hall 3 hours earlier, with the same quiet confidence that had carried her through every round of the competition so far. Her portfolio secured under one arm, her heartbeat steady despite the nerves humming beneath her calm exterior. She had earned her place here through merit alone, through months of relentless preparation and a preliminary showing that had left even the harshest judges nodding in reluctant approval. Sketches and finished canvases that had taken entire nights to perfect, while her hands cramped and her eyes burned from exhaustion. But when she checked the seating chart posted near the entrance, elegant calligraphy listing each finalist's assigned table, her name wasn't where she expected it. A staff member, awkward and apologetic, finally pointed her toward the back of the hall, near a drafty side door that let in a persistent chill every time someone entered, the kind of seat reserved for latecomers or minor guests, rather than a finalist who had qualified through genuine skill. Young Se-yeon, the organizer's niece and a fellow finalist, stood nearby, watching the exchange with a thin, satisfied smile, her designer gown catching the light as she adjusted a bracelet with deliberate slowness. "There's been a small adjustment," Se-yeon said, her tone carrying just enough false sweetness to make the insult unmistakable. "We felt the front arrangement should reflect artists who truly fit the tone of tonight's showcase, and that does not suit you." Doris held her gaze for a long moment, understanding exactly what was being said beneath the polite phrasing. She had watched Se-yeon grow visibly tense every time judges lingered too long over Doris's preliminary work, had noticed the careful, calculated distance the girl kept whenever cameras pointed anywhere near her, the practiced way she steered conversations back toward her own submissions whenever Doris's name came up among the other finalists. Now she is understanding where this is headed. She said nothing in response beyond a small, composed nod, refusing to give either Se-yeon or her uncle, director Oh Dae-hyun, the satisfaction of a reaction. She carried her own chair to the corner she'd been assigned and sat, spine straight, hands folded, determined to let her work speak louder than any seating chart ever could. The chill from the door crept steadily against her back throughout the opening remarks, but she didn't shift, didn't complain, simply absorbed it the way she had absorbed every small slight thrown her way since arriving in this industry. She had no idea, sitting there in the cold draft, that someone in that room had been quietly watching her career unfold for months, admiring not just her talent, but the steady grace with which she carried herself through every small slight the industry had thrown her way. A grace that had, without her ever realizing it, already made a lasting impression on exactly the kind of person capable of changing everything in a single evening. Now, moments after Seo-jun placed her chair beside his own, Director Dae-hyun approached with visible unease, his usual confident stride replaced by something far more cautious, weaving quickly between tables to reach the main table before the murmuring crowd could grow any louder. "Mr. Yoon," he said carefully, bowing slightly, sweat already beading faintly at his hairline despite the hall's controlled temperature. "Perhaps there's been some confusion about the seating arrangement. If I may suggest." "There's no confusion," Seko-jun said, cutting through the pleasantries with a calm that carried far more weight than any raised voice could have managed. "I came here tonight specifically to see Doris's work. If she isn't seated where she belongs, with the respect her talent has earned, I'll be withdrawing my sponsorship from this event immediately." The color drained visibly from Dae-hyun's face. Murmurs rippled through the surrounding tables, several committee members exchanging alarmed glances, whispered calculations already running behind their eyes about what such a withdrawal would mean for the evening's carefully balanced budget. "That won't be necessary," Dae-hyun said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Miss Doris is welcome at the main table. A simple oversight, nothing more." "An oversight," Seo-jun repeated, his tone carrying just enough quiet skepticism to make the word land heavier than it should have. "I look forward to hearing how such an oversight happened to place the strongest finalist in this competition beside a drafty door, while your niece's work sits comfortably at the front." Dae-hyun's mouth opened, then closed again, no adequate response arriving in time. Seo-jun said nothing further, his silence carrying more authority than any additional words could have. Dae-hyun retreated quickly, already gesturing sharply toward a staff member to adjust the printed programs, his composure visibly rattled for the remainder of the evening. Doris turned to Seo-jun, still trying to process the speed of everything that had just unfolded around her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I never knew someone would notice the obvious injustice towards me." "I did," he said simply. "I've watched your work for months, Doris. I wasn't going to sit at the front of this room while you were pushed into the cold." She studied him for a moment, genuinely puzzled by the depth of a gesture from someone she barely knew. "I don't understand why someone like you would go to such lengths for someone you've never actually met." "You'd be surprised how much I already know," Seo-jun said, something quietly warm beneath the composed surface of his voice. "Your preliminary piece, the one with the woman standing in the doorway looking back at everything she'd left behind. I saw it online months ago, before any of this. I've followed everything you've made public since then, every gallery post, every small showing you did in local community spaces before this competition ever gave you a proper stage. Most people only started paying attention once the judges did. I was paying attention long before that." Doris felt heat rise in her cheeks, unprepared for the admission, unprepared for the realization that someone had been watching her quiet, unglamorous climb, long before tonight's spectacle gave it any real visibility. It was strange, she thought, how much more meaningful it felt to be seen before the applause started, rather than because of it. "Now go prepare," he said, a faint smile softening the composed lines of his face. "The evening is about to begin, and I have a feeling everyone in this room is about to understand exactly why I insisted." Doris nodded, but hesitated a moment longer, curiosity finally overtaking her composure. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why come to an event like this at all?" she asked. "Men like you usually send representatives. Why show up in person for an art showcase?" Seo-jun considered the question seriously, as though it deserved more than a casual answer. "Because representatives can't tell me what a piece feels like standing in front of it. Numbers on a report can't capture whether an artist has something real to say or is simply chasing trends. I learned early that if something genuinely matters to me, I show up for it myself." "And tonight mattered to you?" she asked. "Tonight mattered to me the moment I learned you'd be presenting," he said simply, holding her gaze without any of the practiced charm she might have expected from someone in his position. "I don't waste my evenings on things that don't." Before she could find a response, the MC's voice rang out over the room, calling the evening officially to order, and Doris found herself settling into the seat beside him as the lights dimmed slightly and the first finalist was called to the stage. The presentations began shortly after, each finalist stepping forward to unveil their submitted masterpiece before a room of investors, collectors, and critics, with the power to shape careers in a single evening. Doris watched the other finalists take their turns, applause rising and falling in polite, predictable waves, her own pulse climbing steadily as her position in the lineup drew closer. When her turn arrived, she walked to the center of the stage with the same steady composure that had carried her through the cold corner and the quiet insult waiting for her there, refusing to let the room see the nerves fluttering just beneath her calm exterior. Her masterpiece, a sweeping canvas layered with rich, textured color that seemed to shift and breathe under the gallery lighting, drew an audible intake of breath from the crowd the moment the covering fabric fell away. The piece depicted a woman standing at the threshold of an open doorway, sunlight pouring in around her silhouette, one hand reaching forward while the other still gripped something unseen behind her, a visual language of leaving and arriving all at once that seemed to resonate instantly with everyone watching. Several collectors leaned forward in their seats, murmuring quietly to one another, already reaching for the printed catalogs to confirm the piece's title. But she wasn't finished. With practiced, confident movements, she began a second piece live on the stage, brushstrokes building rapidly into something raw and immediate, the room falling into rapt silence as they watched an entire piece take shape in real time, color layering over color, until a striking image emerged from what had, moments earlier, been a blank canvas. Her hands moved with the assured rhythm of someone who had spent countless solitary nights perfecting exactly this kind of controlled spontaneity, each stroke deliberate, even as the overall effect appeared effortless, almost impossible to have been created in mere minutes rather than months. When she finished, setting down her final brush with a small, satisfied breath, stepping back to reveal the completed work in full, the applause rose slowly at first, then swelled into something unmistakable, several guests rising from their seats entirely, a standing ovation building from the back rows forward until the entire hall was on its feet. The bidding began almost immediately. Paddles rose across the room, numbers climbing steadily higher than any other piece that evening had commanded, the auctioneer's voice quickening with barely contained excitement as the figures kept rising. Doris stood quietly to the side, watching numbers she had never dared imagine attached to her own work rise higher with each passing minute, her heart hammering with a mixture of disbelief and quiet, fierce pride, her hands still faintly stained with fresh paint from the piece still drying on its easel. Then Seo-jun raised his paddle. $2 million, he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the murmur of the room. The hall went utterly silent. $2 million, nearly 5 times the previous highest bid, a number that instantly cemented Doris's piece as the undisputed centerpiece of the entire showcase. No one challenged the bid. No one dared. The auctioneer, momentarily stunned into silence himself, finally called the sale, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of astonishment. For a moment, Doris simply stood there, unable to fully process the number that had just been attached to something she'd created, with her own 2 hands, late at night, in a small rented studio, where the paint sometimes froze in winter, because the heating was unreliable. She thought of every gallery that had turned her away without a second glance, every dismissive email that never explained why her work wasn't quite right for their walls, every night she had questioned whether any of it would ever amount to more than a private passion no one else would ever value the way she did. None of those rejections had prepared her for this moment, standing in a hall full of the city's most powerful collectors, while the highest bid of the evening carried her name attached to it. Across the room, Seon sat rigid in her seat, her own submitted piece having drawn only polite, modest interest in comparison, her carefully cultivated status as the evening's presumed star collapsing in real time in front of the very investors she had hoped to impress. Her uncle sat beside her, equally stiff, watching the culmination of every calculated sleight he had allowed unravel spectacularly in front of the city's most powerful collectors, his earlier confidence now nowhere to be found. By the end of the evening, Doris was announced as the overall winner of the showcase. The applause thunderous as she made her way to the stage to accept the honor. The same hall that had once relegated her to a drafty corner, now rising to its feet in her honor. Seo-jun presented the award himself, his expression carrying none of the practiced formality of the other officials on stage. Only genuine, quiet pride. "Tonight, we witnessed something rare," he said to the assembled crowd, his voice carrying easily across the hall, every table falling silent to listen. "Not just talent, though there was plenty of that on display tonight. We witnessed grace under circumstances that should never have been asked of her in the first place. A true artist doesn't need the front row to prove her worth. But she deserves it all the same." A few uncomfortable glances shot toward Dae-hyun, who suddenly found the tablecloth in front of him deeply fascinating, his niece beside him equally unable to meet anyone's eyes. Alongside the award, Seo-jun personally presented Doris with a contract, one that would secure her creative future far beyond a single evening's applause, ensuring her work would continue reaching the collectors and galleries capable of recognizing its full value for years to come. Doris accepted it with hands that trembled slightly, overwhelmed by a night that had begun in a cold, forgotten corner, and ended with her name announced to a room full of people who would remember it for years to come, flashbulbs catching the moment from every angle of the hall. Days later, a formal review was launched into director Dae-hyun's conduct, the seating manipulation and clear favoritism toward his niece drawing scrutiny from committee members, eager to distance themselves from the embarrassment of that evening. Testimonies from staff who had witnessed the original seating change corroborated exactly what Doris had quietly endured, painting a picture the committee could no longer ignore or excuse as simple oversight. The review moved swiftly, given both the public nature of the incident and the influence of the sponsor whose withdrawal threat had exposed it in the first place. Dae-hyun was formally dismissed from his position within the week, stripped of the very authority he had once used so casually to diminish someone he saw as beneath his notice. His niece's own reputation within the arts community quietly diminished alongside his. Weeks later, Doris and Seo-jun grew closer, their conversations extending naturally beyond art into the kind of honest exchange that came easily once the pretense of a formal gala had fallen away. They met for coffee between her gallery meetings, exchanged messages about pieces she was working on, small photographs of works in progress sent late at night when neither of them could sleep, and slowly, without either of them quite naming it, began looking forward to each other's company in a way that had nothing to do with contracts or auctions at all. Word of the showcase spread quickly through the city's arts community, and Doris found herself fielding invitations from galleries that had once turned her away without so much as a formal reply, now suddenly eager to feature her work. She accepted only a few of them, choosing carefully, no longer willing to settle for spaces that hadn't valued her, before her name carried weight attached to it. Over a quiet dinner one evening, in a small restaurant, she told him what she intended to do with the money from her contract and the sale of her piece. "I want to open an art academy," she said, turning her water glass slowly between her fingers as she spoke, watching for his reaction. "Back home, in South Africa, for kids who love this the way I did, who won't have access to formal training, the way I never did growing up. Materials, mentorship, real instruction, not just whatever scraps of encouragement they can find on their own. I want to give them the early opportunity nobody gave me." Seo-jun listened intently, setting down his own utensils entirely, something in his expression shifting into quiet, genuine admiration as she spoke. "That's not just a good idea," he said. "That's the kind of thing that outlasts every gallery wall and every auction number this city can offer. Buildings get sold, trends change, but something like that, real opportunity handed to a child who never expected it, that stays with a person for the rest of their life. I know that better than most." "Is that why art matters so much to you?" Doris asked, curious now, having wondered for weeks what drove a man of his position to spend so much of his time and resources on artists rather than the countless other investments available to him. Partly, he admitted, my own path wasn't handed to me the way people assume it was. Someone believed in what I could build long before I had anything to show for it. I've spent years trying to be that person for others, when I recognize it. And you recognized it in me, she said softly. From the very first piece of yours I saw, months before tonight, he said. I'd like to be part of this academy, if you'll let me. Not as a favor, as a genuine partner. Doris smiled, feeling something settle warmly in her chest, a partnership forming that felt far more meaningful than any single night's recognition, more lasting than even the $2 million that had changed the trajectory of her entire career in one evening. I'd like that very much. They sat together for a long while after that, talking through what the academy could become, sketching rough ideas on a napkin between them, both of them fully aware that whatever had started as one man carrying a chair across a crowded room had already grown into something neither of them intended to let go of easily. The world so often decides where people belong before ever taking the time to see what they're truly capable of, pushing talent into cold corners simply because it threatens someone else's comfort, dismissing years of quiet discipline with nothing more than a thin smile and a rearranged seating chart. But real worth doesn't diminish simply because it's been seated in the wrong place. It waits, patiently, for the moment someone finally looks closely enough to see it clearly. Sometimes it only takes one person willing to walk the length of the room, in front of everyone who ever doubted, and put things exactly where they should have been from the very beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more amazing Afro-Korean drama stories, and we'll see you in the next one.